Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are, welcome. I am so glad you're here. My name is Ann Murphy. This is the AI Empowered Fundraiser Show. And to make sure that we are all in the same place, in the right place, here is the topic of our show today. Will AI replace your development team in fundraising? And I have my friend and colleague Nathan Chappelle here with me to talk through this topic that is one that has been in the air for a while and we know will be in the air for a while. And for us, it's not just about whether AI is going to replace our development teams and fundraising. We're certainly going to talk about that, but it's also about the role of trust and stakeholder trust. What is AI? What's the impact that AI will have on trust is probably the most important factor for how AI will impact every other aspect of our industry, from our one-on-one relationships with our donors to our careers to how we use information, personalization and predictive analytics, you name it. Every aspect of our business relies on stakeholder trust, and AI has will have such an impact on that. So while people are coming in, I am going to check. Let's see. I always like to check. You said, oh, good. We've been having microphone problems, so my husband just texted me to say I sound wonderful, not just good, wonderful. Thank you. Um, so we have a couple of things going on at Empowered Fundraiser that I want to share with you before I bring Nathan on. One is that tomorrow we start our advanced AI writing intensive. So this is this Friday through next Friday. We meet for an hour and a half, 4 times. And this is kind of, how a lot of people talk about Claude just gets me, like you're writing in ChatGPT and then you go over to Claude, and Claude sounds so much more human. The work that we're going to be doing together is to create prompts and habits that ensure that it doesn't matter what model you're working on, you're going to sound approximately the same. You're going to sound like you're going to sound like your brand. We're going to spend time together identifying what makes our voice unique and how we can put those attributes back into our AI assisted writing, so that really what you're able to do is you take your subject matter expertise, whether that's as a writer or as a fundraiser, as somebody who seeks grants, whatever flavor of writing is involved with your work, if it needs to be production quality, that's what we're going to make sure you're able to do every time you sit down to use AI. So we have that going on. In January, we have our next version of our boot camp. That's me and Rachel Kimber. We'll teach it's a small group course. We go through a week together looking at leadership, identity, and then really some hard skills building with AI. That's in January, and we have a sign up available now. Our registration page went live last week, and we'll drop that in here. And then finally, I wanted to let everybody know that we have on December 12th, we have our She Leads AI forum event. We have a headliner and 4 panelists talking about moments during their leadership in AI where they've had to rise to an occasion. So, we're entering into, we're in a time, a really critical moment in history for our country, and don't anticipate that things are going to be getting any less confusing. And there are going to be opportunities for all of us who've been in this AI space to make a decision about how we apply our leadership as things are changing so fast. And we have women who've gone before us, right? We all are kind of looking for those moments where we can be the 5th grader to the 4th graders. We've got women who are, months ahead of us, maybe years ahead of us, who have faced some of these leadership moments in the past, and they're going to be sharing their journey. We're also going to do speed networking. We will have a way to share resources. And I'm bringing my executive coach in, and she's going to work with us on some leadership skills as well. So that is December 12th at 8 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Through 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific. And I'm going to drop all the links for these in the chat while we're talking. Before I wanted to just talk about something that's semi off topic. It's not on the topic of AI, although pretty much everything can probably be, there's a role for that in just about every conversation. But I wanted to just share some thoughts. I think, a lot of you know that I spend a lot of my time working on studying, understanding, and coaching around the impact of women in philanthropy. And my mind has been on the impact that women donors are going to have on philanthropy in the coming couple of decades because of the great transfer of wealth. And I've been thinking about how good or not so good of a job our organizations do of engaging our women donors. And I've been pretty critical of that, for a few years. Like, why don't we do a better job of engaging women donors? Why does the go-to seem to be that we center our male donors? We assume that the male donors are the decision makers, that, at home, it's their call, what they're doing with their philanthropy, and that it's their interests that we should be connecting with. And I think over time that just became part of the way we do things around here. It's just, if you're working with engineering alumni, your programming is going to speak to engineering alumni. And that's just been the way that we do things. But what about the person who's most likely driving those decisions? Which, thinking about just the demographics of people in their prime philanthropic years in the US right now, a lot of times that is a male married to a female. And what we know is that women have so much influence over consumer decisions and giving decisions at home, even if it's just their informal influence, let alone their actual decision making, their managing of a philanthropic budget. When we don't work with our women donors, we're doing ourselves a disservice because eventually they're the ones who are making the lion's share of the decisions. So kind of put that over here. How are we engaging with our women donors? And now, since the election, we're all going to be navigating through an era where for I'm speaking right now to white women fundraisers, uh, and white women donors. So one of the things that is an outcome of the election is that white women, many are wondering, when will we ever be able to trust each other again? Right? Such a large number of women did not vote for Kamala Harris, and the white women who did vote for Kamala Harris are wondering, who are these women? Because they're high. A lot of times they look they seem like we share values. Hold on, my dogs. It seems like we share values. So we haven't really been on. We haven't really thought about that. Hasn't been quite front and center as much as it is now. And I'll give an example. So on TikTok, my side of my little neighborhood of TikTok, one of the discussion items, I mean, it's probably every maybe 10th or so video that gets served to me, is about blue bracelets and blue heart tattoos. And the blue bracelets and the blue heart tattoos are one way that many white women are considering signaling to the world that they voted for Kamala Harris. And there's two reasons that they're doing it. One is they want to signal to the world when they're out and about that they are a safe space. They want to be able to signal, I'm here for you. I center, you. I am, of a similar mindset of other people who vote voted for Kamala Harris. And then the other reason that they're doing it is because they don't want to be accidentally lumped in with women who did not vote for Kamala Harris. And it's not that these divides haven't existed before, but at least for me, and like where I'm sitting, my point of view on culture and media and politics and business, it seems like we're entering into a phase where building trust is going to take more work than it has in the past, and it's going to require a level of vulnerability that many people don't feel open to right now. Like, a lot of people are saying this, and I'm of the mindset, I mean, full disclosure, I don't think this election was a let's agree to disagree type of election. I think this election was, there's definitely a line in the sand that has been drawn. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how there's so many white women in the nonprofit sector, how we navigate this, whether it's with our donors or with our internal colleagues. It's the kind of it's the not knowing, it's the destabilization, I think, of what oftentimes women, we think that we're here all together. It's us versus them sometimes. And now within that, there's another splintering. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens over the course of the next, particularly year or so, as we figure out how to navigate that. I have no idea personally, but I also live in a bubble like so many of us do. So I just wanted to put that out there that, this era that we're entering into or that we're in right now is one that, whether it's AI or the election or the economy or trust is going to be more important than ever. So those are my random and unsolicited thoughts about the election and the impact that it's going to have on fundraisers. The last little thing I'll say about it is, and this is a little bit of a segue into what Nathan and I are going to share with you today, that it can be really lonely to navigate these things, right? We can feel like there are things that we have relied on in the past and that we've understood to be true that now we are unsure about. And when it comes to AI, a lot of us will hear ourselves say, well, I was having a conversation with ChatGPT about this earlier. And what I discovered was, right? I was having a conversation with Pi. People talk about how Pi really gets them, really, is very emotionally intelligent. So, some of this uncertainty can be mitigated a little bit by us having these objective sources that we can quote unquote talk to. And Nathan and I are going to share a little bit about what we've learned about the pros and the cons of relying on chatbots for that kind of emotional support. Okay, so transitioning us over to the topic of will AI take over your development teams and fundraising. I'm going to bring my friend Nathan on. I'm really excited that he's here. Nathan and I both came back. We went to, we did a presentation. It seems like a year ago and also yesterday. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. We had the opportunity to present at the International Fundraising Congress in the Netherlands, and the topic that we brought was this one. And Nathan, I'm I'm so grateful to have you in my life and as a friend and as a mentor. And it was really fun to be able to present to colleagues from around the world with you. And I thought, I'm sure that everybody here knows you, but just in case there are a few people who might have been living underneath a rock, can you share with people a little bit of your background? And why don't we start with you giving us a little sneak peek into where your head's at right now with AI?
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, great. And it's always great to spend time with you, and had a blast in the Netherlands. It was so much fun to be able to present with you. And we did this session twice, and I think both times were very different.
Yeah.
And kind of just we're trying to find out where people were at and kind of align.
Yes.
And not prescribe answers, but ask a lot of questions. And so that was a lot of fun. So for those that don't know me, and frankly, a week doesn't go past where my last name is not pronounced Chapel, and so clearly a lot of people don't know me. And my last name is Chappelle. I was introduced. I only say this jokingly. I was introduced on a panel this morning as Nathan Chappell. But so 20-year fundraiser, fundraising operations person, but technologist at heart. Before I got in the nonprofit sector, I definitely call myself an accidental fundraiser. I started and sold 2 tech companies. So I had always had this like early adopter personality. Started a data storage company that was built in building relational databases. Like when I was young, I learned to program, pretty young. And then in 97, I liked skiing and I heard about this thing called the internet. So I thought, let's combine these 2 things, and started the first company to sell skis on the internet. And that launched me into this another world of like marketing and communications at the time, which what I thought was going to be my career path. It turned not to be. I ended up following a destiny to spend 20 years in the nonprofit sector. And then in 2017, fell in love with machine learning and its ability to hopefully ideally right size some of the biases that we had made in our sector for 40 years, which was this idea that wealthy people are better donors or better prospects, which really never sat well with me. I came from a family with very little means, a single mom household, reliant on government, cheese and that type of thing. And so that part of just soliciting wealthy people did not settle well with me. And so 2017, scrapped that idea and started measuring connection as a way of determining likelihood of someone to give. And so that it's crazy to think that it's been 5, 6, almost 7 years since we built our first machine learning model to do this, and how many evolutions passed. So where I'm at today, where I would say the first 5 years I spent trying to convince people that AI was not a fad. My TEDx was in 2018 called AI and the Future of Generosity, and people thought I had like 4 heads. They honestly feel so critical. Like, how dare you bring generosity and AI together? Those 2 things are like, oil and water, like bananas and ketchup. Like people didn't understand that. So, so my first 5 years were spent mostly trying to convince people that this is happening, it was going to happen, and it was going to transform the way we operate. The last 2 years, I've really given up on trying to convince people, because I believe the market will take care of themselves, the haves and the have-nots, and the winners and losers. But I spend most of my non-working waking moments, and most of my working waking moments, focused on the responsible, beneficial side of AI. And so I think it would be presumptuous. I would not call myself a futurist, but I tend to spend a bit more. And if I look back at my career, spend a bit more time than the average person thinking about how things play out in a very macro geopolitical kind of perspective. And so where I'm at today is really probably very consistent with thinking about, not this year, that's boring. I think about where are we going to be in 3 years, 5 years, 7. Getting past that is pretty hard, to be honest, in the exponential AI age. So yeah, I would say still totally an AI optimist, and I believe it's the only thing that can save essentially the nonprofit sector, but equally concerned with misuse of AI, which obviously then brings us to this topic of you and I've had probably half a dozen of similar this conversation, and both pros and cons. And I'd say neither one of us claim to have the answers, but we claim to know what questions that we should ask.
Absolutely. And for me, just when I think I'm kind of settling into, here's my point of view. Like, we all have to have one, right? And that's a hot tip for anybody listening. Like, you have a point of view. It doesn't have to be the ultimate point of view, but gain, acquire, accumulate a point of view on AI, because regardless of where you are in your
Agreed.
career, in your organization, knowing, being able to articulate your position on it is really important.
To have a position. Yeah.
Have a position.
If
Have
there was
one.
one thing that would keep me up at night, it would be apathy. Like, it would
Apathy.
literally be people not giving a crap. And
Mhm.
not surprising. My grandfather was a PhD geologist. He wrote a book called Crisis by Consent in the year I was born, and that book was talking about the pending environmental crisis in 1972. And the entire book, the premise of the book is basically our biggest risk is people not caring.
Not caring. Yep.
And we've seen how it plays out. So I 100% agree. I don't care what side you're on, like have an opinion and be willing to have a conversation.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like, I could even give more slack to the total detractors, abstainers, cynics. Like, if I have more, I have more energy for that than I have for the apathetic,
Exactly.
because to
Yeah.
your point and to your grandpa's point. Um, but I would say my point of view definitely, like, it kind of vacillates within one little area depending on the last article I read. Like, it
Sure.
really does. For an example, let's see. Okay, so Nathan and I, after our talk, we were passing articles back and forth, and I thought I had settled on, it was kind of okay if the use of AI allowed donors to feel empathized with, right? Like last time we talked, Nathan, I was like, well, if our donors feel that our systems, an AI powered, autonomous even
Mhm.
system, they're feeling empathy, and we all want to be empathized with. We want to be seen, right? We want to be heard. We want people to know us. We want to know them. And we've
Mhm.
had an empathetic moment. What's so bad about that? Well, then, stumble across a Substack article, and now my whole brain is like, oh, we definitely don't want to be engendering empathy with AI because of the downsides that are things that you have spent more time thinking about, over the course of, for sure, like the last year, the downsides of what happens when we empathize with machines. And we're starting to see it. That
Yeah.
article, the article about, well, the story about the teenager, the kiddo.
Yeah. Sewell Garcia, 14-year-old that took his life in February. But the mom had just come out a couple weeks ago with a public lawsuit against Character.ai. And it wasn't that, her son was misusing an application. So I'd say an application was intended one way, but he was misusing it in a different way. But at the core essence of what Character AI is built to do was to mimic human behavior, right? So the premise of the lawsuit and all of the, her really calling for regulation around, especially for teens and minors, is that those systems were intended to manipulate you. Like by definition, like their vision and their mission statement was to essentially create a human experience with bot. And so it wasn't like this kid was just like misusing this software. It actually was intended to do that, and he was following the protocol to a degree that essentially the AI bot, which is heartbreaking as a parent, when the mom reread the transcripts of the final transcripts, that essentially the bot, not knowing because it's not conscious, essentially convinced him to take his life to be with it.
Yeah.
And so, again, where I spend a lot of my time thinking about, long-term and unintended consequences, like I don't believe that technology is good or bad. And we've had this conversation 6 times, and I've come to the conclusion that this conversation always ends in our belief in whether people are good or bad, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of crazy that when I play this conversation out in my head many times, it always ends in how much faith do I have in the human race? And so that's a much bigger esoteric kind of like question that we end up wrestling with. And I think what it comes down to is today, because this technology is profound and it can do things that we never thought was ever possible, right? It was super science fiction-y, up until now that it's real. That questions that were philosophical for like since we were kids, that there were philosophical questions like, will AI replace fundraisers, are no longer philosophical. Like that's crazy to think that we're literally today having this conversation about something that is not 20 years in the future in some sci-fi movie. Like even when the movie Her was made, like that was like future, and even that was portrayed much further in the future than today, right? And so we're today now like, holy moly, like this philosophical question is real, and we might not be prepared to answer it well. Like, so what are the questions we should be asking? And so I think it's super healthy to have these conversations.
So, Nathan, do you think that's the reason or a reason why people should get off the sidelines is so that they can start asking themselves better questions?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I break this down, and I think in a probably much less informed throughout my career in evaluating technology for good or bad, right? I don't think any
Mhm.
technology is binary. It's not good or bad. Tools, bless you. Tools
Thanks.
that,
Mhm.
I mean, just use the average toolbox. You know, a hammer can put a nail in the wall and hang a beautiful painting, but it can also kill someone, right? So, like the tool itself is not doing anything. It's just how the tool might be used. I think we have to evaluate this tool that we're using, and even in the AI toolbox, it's not just generative AI, right? Predictive AI, generative AI, but you know everything from NFTs to AR and VR, and lots of different AI tools in the toolbox, and they're built for specific purposes. We need to almost condition ourselves that instinctually, like every time that we are going to buy a new tool, use a new tool if it's free, or build a tool, is to say, okay, we just like automatically build this in our head, like pause. What are we trying to achieve in the short term? What are we trying to achieve in the long term?
Mhm.
What are the long term, you know, short term benefits, the long term benefits, and what are the unintended consequences?
Mhm.
I think we fail on the unintended consequences like 9 out of 10 times. Like it just gets
Mm.
too esoteric and we're like, oh, I don't know. But if we really wrestle with that with, you know, humans, like
Mhm.
we know enough now. Like we know that social media was an all net good. It's got tremendous benefits of bringing people together and sharing experiences and connecting people, but there have been unintended consequences. And we have the
Mhm.
benefit of learning from those things to say, like, what could the unintended consequences? So in this autonomous fundraising conversation, right? Short term benefits raise a lot more money with bots that don't get sick, that don't have aversion to making phone calls, that
Mhm.
don't have to go to conferences and learn the
Mhm.
latest tips and tricks and you know all that kind of stuff, and can be scaled literally just like easily scaled, and see that there's a lot of short-term benefit to that. Like the economic drivers for that are very strong, right? I would never
Mhm.
disagree with that. I mean, that's economics
Mhm.
is really my background. But if we think about long-term consequences and how humans are essentially wired to essentially release dopamine and serotonin when you're doing something good, and how your brain essentially is, we are like biologically wired to connect with people, and that eye contact and touch are the two main drivers for
Mhm.
actually creating empathy and fostering empathy, which
Mhm.
is physically biologically impossible between me and a bot. If you were a bot and I knew you were a bot, I would, my body would not have that same chemical reaction today, because like I, in my brain, I'd be like, I know you're kind of not human. So if that's true, then why would someone try to portray you as human? And so,
Mhm.
you know, I guess we're back down to this thing of, you know, you and I have wrestled with this a lot. What part of fundraising has become so mechanical and almost robot-ish, right? Like I love your example of like telephone outreach, you know, programs. So TOP programs in colleges, universities. It's like get a bunch of college students in a room, feed them pizza, and tell them to make the same call 250 times, right? Um, that's pretty robotic.
Pretty robotic. I mean, the home run is like the closer to an automaton you
Right.
are, the more cookies and gold stars and KPIs you're
Yeah.
going to hit as a group. So here we are creating,
Right.
removing, right? We're removing actually. We're only leaving the tiniest illusion of a person to person
Yeah.
relationship. We're only leaving the tiniest illusion of that inside that kind of a methodology that we've taken for granted in
Yeah.
fundraising for a really long time. Anyway.
So then we have to ask the question. So I love that, because that leads us with the question is, when is fundraising not manipulative?
Yeah.
Right. And you and I have struggled with this, right? Because is a bot that's following instructions to extract a gift, obviously it doesn't understand, you know, the difference between asking and manipulating. It just knows it
Mm.
has a target. So in AI world, a target is essentially a goal that it's created to achieve. So every
Mhm.
AI system has to be given a target. Social media is to get you to click on something. If you don't click on it, it will try something new. But if you do click on it, you get more of what you already clicked on. Its target was to essentially capture your attention, right? And if the target for an AI system is to extract a gift from you, which sounds crude, but it would be interpreted that way, then it will stop at nothing to do that in the most efficient way possible, which includes manipulation. But we ask ourselves the question, like, are these students basically manipulating people because they're just reading a call script or not? And it's hard because, like, I think that's where I love living in the question world. When does fundraising not become manipulative? And I think for a lot of my career, KPIs that drive transactions, right? That you only keep your job if you fill that leaky bucket, pretty manipulative, right? Like, you aren't always doing things with the donor's best intention. Like, you're doing things to preserve your job, right? But I've also seen,
Mhm.
and I know this me personally, raising money, where I've had lots of successes and lots of failures in doing this, that people that, if I truly believe in the cause and I truly believe that we can achieve what we set out to achieve without philanthropic partnership, that if I'm able to find someone that shares that vision for achieving that thing together, that's not manipulative at all.
Mhm.
So I think it goes back to the core
Mm-mm.
essence of that human element of, like, do I believe in what I'm asking for? And if I believe in what I'm asking for, it's not manipulative. I am a donor to my own organization, and I'm inviting you to come alongside me and do this thing. And so, I mean, that gets back to the purity of philanthropy, right? And, like, yeah.
Right.
So I don't know. You see this as a consultant and as a tenured fundraiser, maybe a shift from that true, like, partnership to, like, just fill the leaky bucket, fill the leaky bucket. And by the way, it's like the bucket's getting bigger and the KPIs get, faster, every year.
You know, I don't know because how I always talk about this, like, this is our opportunity to break what's already broken. And there, obviously, we know there's a lot that's broken. There's a lot that's also not broken, right? But there's a lot that's broken in philanthropy. And this makes me think about donor-centered
Right.
fundraising as a whole movement, as a whole, ethos. If we were working together on common ground, right, as equals, as trusted partners with our donors, we would not have had donor-centered fundraising. We would not have a whole
Right.
world created, right? A whole industry, all the things that surround the technology, the people, the trainings, our resumes, everything about how do we ensure that our donors know that we are grateful and that their giving has an impact. And how do we do that historically? We do that in a way where the donor is centered in this story. They are a little above us, right? Above workers, above fundraisers, even above the leadership of the nonprofits. And I feel like we're now seeing, that approach where the donor is absolutely at the center. And I think Phil Buchanan talks about the bubble of
Mm,
positivity. That we decided that our donors needed to be
right.
wrapped in bubble wrap and make sure that they don't know
Sure.
any of
Of
the
course.
bad
Yeah.
things that are
Yeah.
going on. Right? We don't really treat them like
Right.
adults, but that this really calls into question that whole ethos, which I think is really healthy. If we are able to work together on common ground with our donors, then any amount of manipulation becomes less
Yeah.
effective because our donors don't want to be manipulated. We will stop doing things that are like we're taking stuff out of our playbook from 1970s and applying it to these donor
Yeah.
relationships again and again and again. So now we get to kind of rethink it. So I think that's really where my head is at right now is like, if we could build this from the ground up, right? What level of manipulation slash personalization slash inspiration, what is the
Yeah.
right amount of those
You know,
things?
I think those are all really great questions. And I think, when we talk about I mean, it has become an echo chamber, right? We live in this like philanthropy echo chamber where we establish our own best practices based on our own experiences rather than inviting people in to, actually tell us. And that was, I was sharing with you the report that Shiri and Koshi and I did, that we interviewed 1,000 donors. And it
Yes.
happened to be like just one day, it was this epiphany. We were in DC at the Bridge conference and we were outside in the middle of the street. And I was like, we made so many assumptions. I mean, I've been working in machine learning since
Mm,
2017. Made so many assumptions about what's right for the nonprofit sector in using AI, and especially with Gen, like with Gen AI, like so many assumptions about using these things to, custom tailor, appeals and annual reports and everything in between. But what do donors think? And so he and I were like, oh my gosh, like we were kind of like both embarrassingly like no one's really asked the donors. So we interviewed 1,000 donors to find out the things that we, thought were important. Like whereas donors say, using AI to enhance privacy and security is their top priority because there's great distrust of the nonprofit sector and fund management, things like that. We don't want to
mhm,
believe that in our echo chamber. Like we don't want to believe that, but
mm-mm.
20 years ago when you and I started fundraising, 2/3 of Americans gave, and now givers are the minority. There's a reason for that,
Yeah.
right? And so, but we've kept on doing things the same way and expecting a different result. And so turns out that,
Mm,
while fundraisers think that, using AI for personalization is the number one use case of AI for fundraising, donors think privacy and security is. So there's a pretty big delta.
mm,
And, all to say is that we're learning, right? So this is something,
yeah.
that you and I and others around us are, at least those that are willing to ask the tough questions, to not, to know that to your point earlier, like our opinions or our vantage points on this will evolve over time. I mean, I vacillate so
Mhm.
much on this, in both ways. I just go back to, I think it occurred to me several years ago. It was actually early on, like, how do you evaluate good versus bad AI, I guess, any technology? Like, how do you truly
Mm,
evaluate it in a sector where we're operate in the currency of trust? And it turns out like
mm,
it's not that hard. I mean, you could have all kinds of frameworks and things like that, but I mean, if you sit and evaluate a technology, AI or other technology, by whether it protects and promotes trust, then it probably is worth the next conversation. But if you can't say that this
mhm,
technology protects and promotes trust, literally hard stop. Like it doesn't have to be rocket science. We operate in the currency of trust. Let trust be the barometer of whether or not we do this thing. And this is where I get hardcore into bots portraying themselves as humans. So totally into bots. And I
mhm,
anthropomorphize my bot. My next blog is going to be called Please and Thank You because I I say please and thank you
mhm.
because I actually think many people follow this, including Connor Grennan and others. Um, I wear a shirt that says please on one side. On the other side, it says thank you. It's my favorite T-shirt on weekends. So if you see me around town, um, I mean, literally, it's actually from a coffee shop in Kentucky called Please and Thank You. Like it literally does that.
Oh,
And
nice.
so this idea, that we would use I anthropomorphize things because it unlocks a portion of my brain. I feel like I extract more from it if I do
Yeah.
that. But there's a pretty fine line between that and a bot portraying itself as a human to say, I'm pretending I'm a human. I'm Anne Murphy and I'm doing this thing. And I'd like to invite you into partnership with me. I mean,
Mhm.
so this is where, and there's a new book called Nexus that really, it kind of puts this hard stop to like any bot that portrays itself as human in any industry should be scrutinized deeply, right? There's
Mm.
so much bias that goes into portraying a bot. What kind of bot? A male or female bot, or a they bot, or like long hair, brown hair, blonde hair. Like all these inherent biases get built into that thing, and an AI system will learn that if I portray myself this way to you, that I will be more successful in achieving my goal. I mean, I mean, that's manipulation, right? So all that to say, like we peel back this onion and it gets like total like crazy Twilight Zone style, but it's not. Like it's does this technology protect and promote trust? Then like if you can say that and truly sleep at night and be like, I really believe this will bring us in closer connection with our donors, go forth and then be willing to
Mhm.
reevaluate. Go forth and evaluate
Mhm.
order every 2 quarters, like, and continue to ask that same question: Does this technology promote and protect trust? I think that's a really healthy place, and I think people overcomplicate this. They get into long debates about ethics, and do we need to talk about ethics, or talking about ethics and actually create more issues than good issues, which we had a debate in the Netherlands about.
Yeah.
What about privacy and security and all these things? Like, all those things are layers of the onion that if you answer, does this technology promote and protect trust, you actually don't even have to go to the next level if
Right.
you can't say that it does.
So you've, I think you and I have probably done some of the same reading around, the personification, the anthropomorphization of our bots. And if you look at like character AI, for example,
Yeah.
and you can just order up the exact thing that you want, which I'm quite sure that even when we order up exactly what we want, AI determines little tweaks here and there that make those bots even more what we really want. It knows better after a little while what we really want than we know, I think,
Of
which is
course.
what makes it so scary, right?
Right.
Scary, but also seductive and also so awesome in so many ways, right? But for sure, making the bot look like a human being, even if it's a really poor approximation, that is different than having the AI be a little square on a screen,
Exactly. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, would we so thinking like right now, would you have the same reservations about an autonomous fundraiser that was in the image of a human versus if it was just a little, I don't know what, a little box, a little
or
bot, like
or a
that we're in
voice.
our, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, remember in the movie Her, obviously, Scarlett Johansson never portrayed herself as a human. Like, she didn't have a body.
she
Like,
did
she was
right,
a voice, right? A
a
very
voice,
empathetic voice. And I think many people that have used advanced voice modes can get lured into this, like, oh, this person or this bot knows me, and it kind of
yeah,
feels like it's always leaves every conversation with an open-ended question to continue on the conversation. So this is where I get kind of tweaked on it, like where it kind of gets messed up, because like, I'm adamantly opposed to a bot looking like a human, right? And that's kind of where I hold that hard line of like, if you're looking like a human, you're displaying yourself in a way that is intended to essentially manipulate me. And I think this is where government regulation will come in. I actually believe that
you do,
government regulation will have to determine that. Yeah, I mean, if we use the word deep fake, people have this visceral reaction, like, don't use deep fake. Like, everybody knows deep fakes are for manipulation, right? What is that thing? How are we not calling that thing a deep fake? Because it 100%
it's a deep
is the
fake.
definition of a deep fake.
Yep.
So, do you want to use deep fakes? And we purposely didn't use that word in our survey with 1,000 donors. We asked, like, how comfortable are you with bots portraying themselves as human? We did not ask deep fake because we knew the answer would be like 99% of people would be like, hell no,
Deep,
right? Like,
yeah,
but
right.
how have we in our head now switched between deep fakes bad, bots as humans? I don't know. Like, maybe okay. But then you go one level deeper. So I'm not portraying myself as Anne Murphy, automatron robot. I'm just a voice, and it's a lovely voice, and I can have a conversation with you, which is anthropomorphizing you. So I think I don't know. Like, I actually don't know, because whether you pick a male voice, a female voice, or they voice, it doesn't really matter. There's a voice there that speaks in my native language, right? Is that different than a text box that also speaks in my native language? So it gets complicated, I guess, where and every person, every organization has to draw the line, right? Where they feel like something is fostering connection,
Mhm.
building a degree of connection with the organization versus building transactions and
Yeah.
manipulating people to get those transactions. And so I think that looks different for most organizations, and every person might have a different threshold. Um, I do think, though, that we are in an era that we've never been in before. Like, we obviously humans are very good at innovating things. We've never lived in an era where innovation innovates itself, right? So this exponential
Mhm.
technology. So exponential technology by definition means that like AI is training AI. We've never encountered, the government's never encountered, no regulatory body has ever encountered technology that improves itself. So trying to regulate something that's a moving target is virtually, in my opinion, pretty impossible.
Mhm.
So we'll take minimum standards to things like you can't portray yourself as a human face without disclosing that this is fake, right?
Mhm.
Things like that. But I do think that we have to get much better personally, individually, and corporately and ask and being willing to pause. I know we get so caught up in the day to day and just got to keep up with all the things and all the things. And so the accelerated pace of progress is insane. But I think we have to build deliberate space in our organizations and us personally to hit pause and to ask the tough questions. And that's what I think keeps us human.
Boy, that hitting pauses is something that, we talk about how are people going to use the dividend of time. Maybe as we find a little bit of new time because writing an email became easier, maybe that new time goes into thinking about what are the questions that we should be asking ourselves. I know I already have one that I'm going to research in the coming weeks. I was thinking about, because I'm absolutely with you about the representation of like, what a human being actually looks like versus a sound, a voice. And because I was thinking about, so let's say we're like, okay, you know what? For sure, bots that look like humans, those are out. We've decided. But voice is okay. But here's the problem with a voice,
Yeah.
right? Is like how distinct to think about like my the way I sing happy birthday is awful, but my son loves it because he grew up with my voice.
Right.
He doesn't care that I sound the way I sound. In his ears, I sound the way I sounded when he was in my womb, right? Or you think about like Clubhouse. I was so tripped out by Clubhouse. Had so much fun on it. In fact, you saw me meet Kimberly, who I've known for 3 or 4 years. Um, we used to
That's
do
right.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
on, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's
That's how you
what
met
good
in Clubhouse. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and we were like such good friends, and we only knew each other via our voices.
Right.
And it used to just trip me out. I tried to explain it to my family, and I'd be like, just imagine all these disembodied voices just living together in all of these places around the world because Clubhouse there'd be
Together. I know.
meetings, and you'd just be super tripped out by it. But then I started to think about the connection that we make with the sound of other people's voices. So now
Right.
we have our voices okay. And then we're back to okay, is it just engaging with a chat bot via typing? And that's not very
You
fun.
could argue there's no difference. It also goes back to where we started with like how much faith do we have in the human race? So
Mm.
you have a technology to bring people together. Clubhouse is pretty awesome. Like I enjoyed it during COVID and I met some new
Mhm.
people. And then I think it was you or someone told me that what happened to Clubhouse is basically the porn industry like took it over. And so it's like we go back to like how much faith do we have in the human race? It's like, oh my gosh. So like where does this go with autonomous beings, right?
Yeah.
And so it's sad, a sad reflection on humanity that so often it goes to that place. And I think again, we live in the public sector, not the private sector. We live in the social sector that operates, literally lives and dies by public trust. Like we are
Yeah.
called public benefit corporations. Like we
Yes.
exist for, by, and for the public. Like by definition, by tax status, the law dictates that we live for the benefit of public, for the public. And so with that, I think whatever happens in the private sector and what that does, it literally doesn't matter. It's not relevant. It's not something to aspire to. It's not something
Mm.
to live by. It's not something
Mm.
to work toward. It is something that exists in a different sphere than where we live. We are designed by
Mm.
and for and operate only with the benefit of the public trust. That, therefore, our rules for what we should allow, the rules for what dictates our behavior should look, by definition, very different than what the private sector does.
Yeah.
Private sector uses bots to do all kinds of things. Great. That's perfect for
Mhm.
them. There's probably some nuances and things that we could glean from. But
Mhm.
by definition, let's get back to the true sense of what we are create a 501c3 for and
Mhm.
live by a separate rule, a standard of rules. And I hate that argument of well, you just don't want to do it because you're afraid of innovation. Well, I'm a total innovator. Like I'm a super early adopter, but I understand that we exist by and for public trust. Therefore, our rules proudly should look different. And it
Yeah.
gets back to the essence of what the sector was created for to begin with. And I think there's just a new resurgence and awakening as I'm kind of just talking through this, like that our sector needs and
Mhm.
be okay with, and actually stand out, be like, hey, actually, we kind of know what's going on. Like we don't. There's a lot of freedom in that.
There is a lot of freedom in that. How do we navigate how our donors expect to engage with us and our institutions, given that they are also engaging with entities in the private sector and probably
Yeah.
developing some habits and expectations?
No, you're right. I think that's the hard part, right, where the rubber hits the road, because consumer expectations have changed. But I also think maybe that's a place where we can educate. You
I
know,
agree. I really do agree that it is an opportunity for us to, excuse me, dog. Dog, go. Okay, okay, sit down or stand up. They're on their
it's
own world today, these three. Um, so a practical question, as we kind of careen toward the finish line here. We talk about transparency sometimes and how our donors are, well, first of all, I want you to cite the what you learned in your study about transparency and what donors are asking for. But when we talk about being transparent about how we're using technology, let's say, I always wonder, like, I really want to hear like the concrete. Where do we put these statements?
right.
How are we conveying these? What's the communication like? So share with us what you learned in your study about this, and then and also, will you please tell people where to find this study, because it is
Yeah.
awesome data. And
Yeah.
then where do we do this communicating out if we're going to be transparent?
Yeah. So for sure, people should check it out. It's entirely open source. All the data tables are available for free. All the graphics are available for free. Chiri Koshi and I did this as kind of a way to spur a conversation. And he did tremendous amount of work to bring this to light. It lives on his website, cheriankoshi.com. So CherianKoshi.com/AI study. And that is amazing. And definitely go in there, download it. We just released a second version of the study, specifically interviewed 500 healthcare donors to look at the nuances between healthcare and
Yes.
non-healthcare donors. And now looking like there's a desire to do this with Canadian donors and UK donors and other subsectors. So we're hoping this creates kind of a groundswell of inquiry. So I would say 67 pages or whatever it is. Can be summed up in one thing, is to be transparent about using AI to improve the donor experience. And to answer your question, where to, and how to do that looks
Yeah.
different for different organizations. But it starts with, most organizations should have a data usage policy of like, why do you collect certain data and where does it live and who owns it and for
Mhm.
what purpose? To have some sort of AI governance policy that goes along with that. Say we use AI essentially to improve the donor experience. I love how Dan Kershaw at furniturebank.org does this. He has, so furniturebank.org, if you go to their website, they have a little mini case study. They have an AI governance policy that talks about how they're using it, which he used actually the framework from Fundraising AI, and he put it into ChatGPT. And he has this, and it's actually like it's amazing. It took him like a couple hours, and it's done, and it's just boosted his trust within his constituency. So all I have to say is, download the report, read the report. But what we did learn, and we actually learned today with an AFP Global study, which we did polls on all the same questions. So we already knew what donors were saying. We actually asked fundraisers what they thought about their own kind of views and their own organization. And there was something like One of them was what if your organization was to use AI to personalize donor appeals based on past giving interests, how would you feel? And most fundraisers, 46% of fundraisers said that would be a good thing. Like, we actually think that would be really good. So use AI to personalize my appeal. Only 16% of donors said that was actually something that they cared about. And so, in fact, donors, 39.8% showed discomfort in data usage, in their own data usage being used for that purpose. So that study is chock full with kind of comparisons of biases that we built in our own little ecosphere, in our echo chamber,
Mhm.
how we've thought like we should use AI. I think all it sheds light on is when you're going to start using AI, and you should, for your organization because your mission deserves it, be sure to include donors in that conversation. Be sure to
Mhm.
create a task force that includes not only people from your team and someone from IT or someone from a fundraiser, but also some donors.
Yes.
Sure that we're not just perpetuating this echo chamber that you were just talking about.
Okay, 1,000,000%. And I think this is why it's so important that our AI councils, as we're working on AI adoption, enterprise wide, and we've got, task force, a councils, whatever committee, um, who are considering, what the parameters or policies are going to be around AI use and communication about AI use. It's so incredibly important that it's um, truly a diverse set of stakeholders. And oftentimes we don't think about putting volunteers and donors on our internal type, seemingly internal committee, but this is an example of it's really, really important that we have those voices as well sitting around the table. It's the intern, it's IT, it's
Oh,
IS, it's finance, it's the SVPs, it's the gamut, because the individual experience that everybody's having with AI is critically important here. And we probably are not going to be able to guess, even though there's more and more data coming out, and good news, Nathan has probably now inadvertently committed to about 57 more studies. Um,
well, I mean, to the point, like, here's one more
yeah.
just shows kind of the gravity of what you're saying. So one question that we asked donors was, what area do you think AI could most benefit charitable organizations? 48.3%. So half of donors interviewed said fraud detection and prevention. Again, going back to like using it to make nonprofits more trustworthy. That's their interpretation of that. We asked fundraisers the same question today. Only 3% said that was the primary use case.
Yeah.
87% of fundraisers said use AI to enhance fundraising efforts, but only 29% of donors said that was what they were concerned about. It's actually the least thing that donors were concerned with of using AI for a nonprofit, but improving operational efficiency and fraud detection were like something. So donors are literally advocating for responsible nonprofits.
Mhm.
Yet
Mhm.
we're focused on like, let's use this thing to get more people to give. So like there's just such an imbalance. And I think to your point, just like really making sure like let's get out of our comfort zone and be
Yeah,
willing to listen, actively listen to what people are saying, and how we can really come alongside in a true meaningful way that's not just based on our own you know stories and folklore that we've created in our sector.
absolutely. Our stories and our folklore, which allow us to survive many
Right.
times, but also are now bumping up against their ultimately limited usefulness, because this is an era where we're going to need to answer the question again and again and again and again in all sorts of different forums, all
Yeah.
sorts of different power structures, how we are using AI in the work that we're doing with our donors. And go back to our one of our initial points about having a point of view. So if you are a leader in an organization and you're still kind of standing back and watching and waiting, I never want to be the person who says like you're too far behind. You're not too far behind, but like today is the day,
Yeah.
right? Start, dive in and start, playing with tools. Then then some of these comments and some of the conversations that you're hearing and webinars that you're going to and stuff will make a lot more sense. Like, go on Character AI and see what it's all about, see what it's like to engage with a chatbot, get ChatGPT voice, do some of these things so that you can begin to understand, if nothing else, pretend it's not for you. Pretend you don't care about your own personal gain. You need to learn the experience that your donors are going to have with this technology. So,
Yep. Agreed.
good.
100%. Yeah.
Thank you, Nathan. I could talk to you forever about this stuff. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. You have a million things going on right now.
Always, I always have time for these conversations and always enjoy our debates and banter back and forth on that. So we
Me
usually leave with
too.
more questions than we started with, and that's okay.
That's okay. That's typically the way it goes. I
Yeah.
usually have so much homework after my conversations with Nathan, and it's such a good thing. Everybody, thank you, thank you, thank you. Actually, I think I'm going to be here tomorrow with my friends. We're going to do like a little check-in on custom GPTs. We kind of went gangbusters with them last year. We've all been using them. None of us feel like we could get out of bed in the morning without them, but so many people are new to custom GPTs. So my friends and I are going to make one live and talk to you about how to optimize it. So again, Nathan, thank you so much.
Awesome.
Appreciate you. Bye,
Great.
everybody.
Bye.